Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take a focused look at some fascinating ideas, based purely on the source material you bring us.
And today, we've got excerpts from Rudolf Steiner's Occult Science, an outline.
Right. It's described as a follow-up to his book Theosophy, but this one really zeroes in on the evolution of humanity and the Earth, a huge scope.
Absolutely. So our goal here is just to walk you through the key ideas as presented in these excerpts. We're looking at his view of reality, the human being, consciousness beyond waking life,
Cosmic history, even specific influences, and crucially, the path he describes for gaining this occult knowledge.
Exactly. We're sticking strictly to the source material provided, trying to understand its internal logic, not judging it, just unpacking it.
Think of us as guides, mapping out this very specific perspective laid out in the text.
Okay, so let's dive right in. That title, Occult Science. That's bound to raise eyebrows, isn't it? Science and occult aren't usually put together. What's the claim?
Yeah, it's a bold one. The text essentially says it wants to use the method of natural science, rigorous thinking, observation, but apply it to the non-sensory world.
So investigating spiritual stuff with, scientific discipline.
That's the aim presented. But okay, the immediate question is proof.
Sure.
How do you prove something you can't see or measure in the usual way?
And the book addresses that head on.
Yeah.
It admits the proofs don't just, obtrude on you like a lab result.
Right.
The key difference, it argues, is that the proof isn't something separate you find after discovering a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the very path of inner development, the discipline you undertake to perceive these spiritual facts, that is the proof. You literally can't access the facts unless you're already on the path that validates them.
Okay, so the method and the validation are intertwined, not discovery then proof, but discovery through a process that is itself the proof.
Exactly. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about evidence.
He uses an analogy, doesn't he? Something about ice and water.
Yes. It compares someone who only knows ice denying the existence of water.
Even though ice is just frozen water.
Right. To that person, water seems impossible, non-existent. Similarly, the text suggests the spiritual realities behind the physical world are hidden if you only accept sensory evidence.
Got it. Only seeing the solid state, denying the liquid. And this isn't just subjective feelings, right? He stresses objectivity.
Very much so. The training described aims for objective spiritual experiences. Perceived inwardly, yes, but the claim is they're universally valid, verifiable by anyone who develops the necessary inner faculties in the, quote, right manner.
So aiming for a kind of consensus reality, just perceived through different inner instruments.
That's the idea presented.
Fascinating. Okay, so if we're applying this science to the non-sensory, let's start with us, the human being. How does this perspective see us? Clearly more than just flesh and bone.
Oh, much more. The source describes us as having multiple layers, or members. There's the obvious physical body. Interpenetrating that is the ether body, or life body. Think of it as the organizing field for life, growth, reproduction, that kind of thing.
Physical etheric. Got it.
Then comes the astral body. This is the vehicle for feelings, sensations, pleasure, pain, desires, instincts.
So the feeling body, basically. Physical, etheric, astral. That's the corporeal part.
Yes, those three form the sort of bodily foundation. Then we move inward to the soul.
And the soul also has layers.
Three are described. The sentient soul, where raw sensation becomes feeling. The intellectual soul, where thinking and judgment arise. And the consciousness soul, which grasps higher concepts, universal truths, ethics.
Sentient intellectual consciousness. Wow, okay, that's 6 layers already.
And we're not done. Beyond the soul are the spiritual members, which are described as being formed when our higher self works on and transforms the lower ones.
Transforms them? How?
So the spirit self, or manas, is the transformed astral body. The life spirit buddhi is the transformed ether body. And the spirit man atma is the transformed physical body.
Whoa, 9 layers. Physical, ether, astral, sentient, intellectual, consciousness, soul, spirit self, life spirit, spirit man. That's complex. What holds it all together?
The core, the central point.
Is the ego, the I.
The sense of self.
Exactly. And the source points out something unique. I is the one name only the being itself uses for itself. You hear your name from others, but only you say I about yourself. It's presented as the 4th member, distinct from the first 3 bodies, and the source of will and desires that aren't just physical needs.
So the ego isn't just one of the layers. It's like the active agent, the transformer.
That seems to be the picture. The ego works on these other members. For example, just feeling pleasure or pain doesn't fundamentally change your astral body.
Okay.
But consciously working to refine your desires, to transform habits rooted in feeling that work, done by the ego, transforms the astral body over time into the spirit self.
And the ether body, the life body. The ego works on that by changing deeper traits, character, temperament, ingrained habits. This can happen unconsciously, just through life, but the text says things like genuine religious feeling or true art can really impact it, creating a kind of unified quality in the soul that, through repetition, gains power over the ether body. This work develops the life spirit.
Okay, that makes a kind of sense. But transforming the physical body, how does the ego work on solid matter to create spirit man, Atma? That sounds really out there.
It does seem counterintuitive from our usual perspective, but the text insists this is the highest spiritual attainment. It requires the most intense spiritual effort, precisely because the physical is the most dense, the most concealing of the spirit.
So, refining our connection even to the physical through conscious spiritual activity builds the highest spiritual part. It flips the idea that spirituality is just about escaping the physical.
Within the system, yes. And it connects to inheritance, too. The source distinguishes traits from parents versus the unique core personality of a child.
Which it links to a pre-existing spiritual individuality.
Exactly, suggesting the ego brings something entirely new into the inherited stream.
Okay, this naturally leads to thinking about states other than just being awake. Sleep, dreams, death. How are these understood here?
Right. During sleep, the source says the astral body and ego separate from the physical and ether bodies, which remain together in the bed.
Okay, where do they go?
The astral body is described as being in a world like itself, a spiritual environment. It's there that it gathers forces, almost like prototypes, to refresh and restore the ether body.
So sleep is an active spiritual process, not just switching off.
Yes. And there's a paradox. The physical other bodies have the sense organs for the outer world, but for those to work, the astral body has to separate from its own world and immerse itself in the physical etheric during waking life.
Huh. So the astral has to leave its home for us to perceive the physical world clearly.
Interesting. What about dreams? Are they glimpses of that astral world? According to this text, not really. Dreams are seen more as remnants, like echoes, of an older form of consciousness, a picture consciousness, from what it calls the moon evolution stage.
Moon evolution, we'll have to come back to that. So dreams are old echoes?
Old echoes, yeah, but transformed because the ego is present, even if unconsciously. Dreams are described as symbol makers. They weave pictures, often using bits from your day, around underlying feelings or sensations.
Ah, like the examples in the text.
Exactly, dreaming of a fire because you feel too warm, or that intense dream about a child falling into an abyss.
Which turns out to be just a symbol for the feeling of shock or distress caused by an object falling in the room.
Right. The feeling is real. The picture is symbolic embroidery around it. The source is very clear. Dreams are not a reliable way to get actual spiritual scientific knowledge.
Okay, good clarification. So not a path to insight in this view. What about death then? The big separation.
Death is the permanent separation of the astral ego from the physical etheric. The force used nightly for restoration is now free, and this apparently allows the experiences held within the astral body itself to become perceptible to the departing ego.
And what's the first experience after death, according to the text?
A panoramic memory picture. The entire past life unfolds, apparently in reverse order, like a vast tableau.
The whole life flashing before your eyes, but structured.
Seems so. After that, the astral body is kind of left with whatever the ego managed to consciously work on and transform during life. Anything purely instinctual or externally driven doesn't remain in the same way.
And this leads to that idea of the consuming fire.
Yes, that's a striking image. It refers to desires and attachments that were only tied to the physical world with no spiritual counterpart developed by the ego. These are said to be burned away or purified.
The example given is powerful. The angry man reliving hurting someone.
But experiencing the victim's pain, not his own anger. A complete reversal of perspective, forcing an encounter with the consequences of actions, is presented as a purification process.
And the world associated with this purification.
It's described as a realm, sometimes called Kamaloka, inhabited by beings that appear, well, unpleasant or even hostile to spiritual sight. Their nature is linked to destruction and negativity, feeding on those purely earthbound human passions being purged.
Sounds grim, but like a necessary stage in this cosmology. What happens after that? The time between death and rebirth.
The ego continues its journey in purely spiritual realms, an extract or essence of the ether body from the past life containing the fruits, the distilled results of experience and effort, forms the seed for the next life.
The seed for the next life. And reincarnation happens when?
When that seed, the accumulated fruit, is ripe for new experiences that can only be had in a physical body. The timing isn't random. It's linked to changes in the Earth and the cosmos, particularly Earth's relationship with the Sun, ensuring the right conditions for the next stage of the ego's evolution.
Which brings us to that bigger picture, cosmic evolution. This text doesn't just talk about human history, but Earth's history as like different lives of the planet itself.
Exactly. It's a radical concept. Our current Earth isn't the first version. It's described as the fourth major stage in a sequence. Old Saturn, old Sun, old Moon, and now Earth.
And these aren't just planets like we think of them now.
No, they're vast evolutionary cycles, states of being. Matter itself was different, much subtler, less dense in the earlier stages.
Okay, let's briefly touch on those stages as the source describes them. Old Saturn.
Purely heat substance, a cosmic warmth. Beings called spirits of will, wisdom, motion were active. The very first ghostly outlines of human senses appeared then, like heat images or human phantoms.
Just heat, wow. Then Old Sun.
The heat condensed into something like gas or vapor air. Early human physical structures began as delicate heat-permeated forms. Existence was more plant-like. Pleasure-displeasure started. Then spirits of form intervened, sparking instinctive desire.
From heat to gas. Then Old Moon.
A watery state emerged. Beings were like animal plants floating in thick vapor. Respiration began. Consciousness involved powerful inner mental pictures, symbols. There were alternating states of consciousness, but not as stark as our sleepwaking. Human forms became more refined.
Watery animal plants, okay.
Yeah.
And then our current Earth stage begins how?
It starts by recapitulating the earlier stages, but on a new level. Begins with a fire form, an organism permeated with soul and spirit. Humans were sort of shielded initially. The sentient and intellectual souls developed in an egg-like form within this fire heat environment.
Egg-like soul forms.
Then air was introduced to first breath. The life body resounds. Finally, the solid earthy element. The text notes this density made it harder for the soul to shape the body directly. Early Earth also had different rhythms, periods where bodies were corpse-like while souls were elsewhere.
It's an incredibly detailed, symbolic cosmology. And planets and stars aren't just matter.
No, in this view, their movements and qualities relate to the spiritual beings associated with them, influencing everything.
This whole cosmic backdrop sets the stage for human history as we know it, after a great catastrophe mentioned the end of Atlantis.
Right. The text then talks about the post-Atlantean cultural epochs, ancient Indian, Persian, Egypto-Chaldean, Greco-Latin, and our current one, the fifth.
And a major shift in consciousness happened across these epochs.
A huge shift, moving away from an older, innate, dim, clairvoyant consciousness, a kind of lingering, direct, perhaps dreamlike perception of the spirit world.
Towards our modern intellectual, reflective consciousness.
Exactly. People relied less on direct inner vision and more on thinking and feeling to understand things, including the spiritual.
Where did the ancient mysteries and oracles fit in? Were they trying to preserve that older connection?
They're described as institutions founded by initiated guardians, specifically to cultivate and transmit knowledge of the spiritual world during this transition. Different centers or oracles named after planetary principles like Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, Vulcan represented different paths or depths of initiation.
Vulcan linked to early science and art focused on the Earth.
Yes, while Mercury and Venus dealt with higher supersensory knowledge.
And this is where those figures, Lucifer and Ahriman, are introduced as influences. How does the text frame them?
They're presented as spiritual beings exerting specific influences on human evolution. Lucifer is linked to drawing humanity more deeply and perhaps prematurely into sensory experience and earthly intellect, fostering arts and sciences, but also pride, error, and entanglement in the material.
And Ahriman.
Ahriman is associated with promoting a purely materialistic outlook, a deadening of the feeling for the spiritual, leading to rigid, mechanistic thinking. He's particularly linked to influencing those focused solely on the material, like the Vulcan stream. The text even suggests extreme Ahrimanic corruption could historically lead to distorted physical forms.
So opposing forces pulling humanity in different directions.
Yeah. That's the picture. Lucifer pulling towards a brilliant but potentially selfish immersion in the earthly, Ahriman toward a cold, spirit-denying materialism. Zarathustra is mentioned as someone who worked against Ahriman's influence in Persia, pointing towards the spiritual reality, the god of light, behind the physical sun.
And the Christ event. How does that fit into this drama?
It's presented as occurring precisely when humanity's innate supersensible faculties were fading most dramatically. The Christ is described as the paragon, the highest potential of the human ego fully manifest on Earth.
Changing the goal of spiritual seeking.
Yes. The task of mystery wisdom shifted. Before, it was about initiates striving to perceive the sun spirit externally. After, it became about recognizing the Christ principle within humanity and Earth, and understanding the cosmos from this new center.
And the result, in our current age,
Is what the text calls a cleavage in the soul. We have this powerful intellect focus on the sensory world, driving science and technology.
but also a part of us that feels or intuits the spiritual, but lacks the old direct perception. This split between outer science and inner yearning or mysticism is seen as a direct consequence of this whole evolutionary path.
And modern science, in this view, actually benefited from the brain becoming specialized for just physical reality.
So given this cleavage and our focus on the physical, how does someone gain access to this occult science today, according to the text? How do you bridge that gap?
It's about consciously developing states of soul beyond ordinary waking and sleeping. You need a state where sense input and even ordinary memory are excluded, but consciousness remains sharp and active.
That sounds challenging.
Yeah.
What are the steps or stages involved in developing that?
The source outlines 3 main stages of higher cognition. First is imagination.
Imagination, like daydreaming.
No, quite the opposite of passive daydreaming. It involves intense, active inner concentration, often on specific symbols or sequences, like vividly building and holding the image of a plant evolving into a human form, excluding all other thoughts, or meditating on the form of a crystal, then plant growth, then decay, not just thinking about them, but creating living pictures inwardly.
Intense visualization, then.
Extremely intense. It's meant to awaken dormant soul forces. The text calls this imaginative world a dynamic, unstable region.
Okay, stage 1, imagination via focused meditation. What's next?
Inspiration. This is reached by meditating not just on static images or forms, but on the feelings and dynamic processes behind them. Feeling the essence of growth or decay, for instance.
Moving from pictures to the forces or feelings behind them.
Exactly. Cognition at this stage is described like reading a supersensible script. You start to understand the relationships between spiritual beings and realities through their inner qualities, not just their outer appearance. It brings orientation and meaning to the imaginative pictures.
Reading an inner language of relationships.
Okay.
And the highest stage.
Intuition. This is described as grasping the inner essence, the very being of spiritual realities themselves. Direct, unmediated understanding with highest, most illuminating clarity.
Direct knowing of the thing itself.
Yes. The source says this is necessary for investigating deeper truths like reincarnation and karma, perceiving the enduring ego across lives, and for perceiving one's own higher self.
Wow. Imagination, inspiration, intuition. It sounds like it requires immense inner work. What specific practices or qualities does the text say are needed?
It's quite detailed. Meditation is key, that intense focus we talked about, but equally important is cultivating specific qualities in everyday life.
Such as?
Calmness, gaining mastery over how you express joy, sorrow, pleasure, pain. Not becoming cold or unfeeling, but ruling the expression. Positiveness, actively looking for the good, the true, the worthwhile, even in negative situations or errors without being blind. And unbiased receptivity.
Ah, that sounds crucial. Being open.
Being truly willing to learn from everything and everyone. Consciously setting aside the tendency to immediately reject things just because they're unfamiliar or contradict what you already believe. Letting go of, I don't believe that, as a first reaction.
That alone is major discipline. Anything else?
Yes, a specific exercise called retrospect. Reviewing your day's events or even a story or piece of music backwards, from end to beginning.
Backwards, why?
The claim is this detaches thought from the habitual physical sequence of time, strengthening it and making it more flexible, preparing it for the nonlinear nature of the spiritual world. It's seen as a healthy way to strengthen thinking.
Interesting. And reverence.
Reverence or devotion is stressed as vital. Cultivating a feeling of awe or respect for ideals, for nature, for the cosmos, for genuine spiritual teachers. The text claims a lack of reverence actually closes the inner senses needed for this path, though it must be balanced with healthy self-confidence, not subservience.
Yeah, so it's a whole transformation, moral, emotional, mental. What about physical exercises like specific breathing techniques? Some paths emphasize those.
This source actually cautions against starting there. It says any physical changes, like in breathing, should arise naturally as a result of the inner soul work, like achieving intuition, not be used as techniques to force spiritual states. Direct physical practices aimed at this can apparently lead to imbalance or illusion.
The inner work comes first. Physical changes might follow.
Got it. And as you progress, thinking, feeling, willing, become more independent.
Yes, they gain a certain autonomy, but the text emphasizes the ego must remain the conductor, keeping them in harmony. At higher stages, you begin to perceive the cosmos itself as a vast, living structure of thought.
This path sounds like it inevitably leads to confronting oneself very deeply. The text mentions the guardian of the threshold. What is that?
Ah, yes. This is described as a crucial, often challenging encounter when first consciously entering the imaginative world. The guardian is essentially your own double or doppelganger.
It's a projection, taking visible form, of your own unrecognized inner landscape, your karma, your hidden faults, your unmastered desires and tendencies, the sum total of your shadow self. It's your soul power taking an independent shape unique to you.
Wow. Why encounter that? It sounds terrifying.
The text presents it as an essential safeguard, absolutely necessary. Because the imaginative world is so fluid, so easily shaped by your own inner state, you could easily mistake your own projections for objective reality.
So seeing your own stuff projected out there forces you to recognize it.
Exactly, it's a test. Can you face your own nature and learn to distinguish it from genuine spiritual perception? Can you observe objectively even when confronted with your own flaws and biases made visible? Without this encounter, the text implies you'd be lost in illusion, unable to tell subjective fantasy from objective spiritual fact.
A safeguard against self-deception then. A tough one, but necessary.
Yeah.
What happens when you successfully face it?
You consciously recognize your own inner baggage. This frees you from unconsciously carrying it into your spiritual perceptions. It purifies your observation, allowing access to experiences less colored by your personal self. It's about achieving genuine objectivity in that inner realm.
Is there only one guardian?
The source also mentions a greater guardian encountered later who isn't so much your shadow self, but more like an embodiment of your higher potential, an exhorter urging you towards further development and the ideal you're striving for.
Okay, so through this whole process, the stages of cognition, the inner work, facing the guardian, what's the fundamental relationship that gets revealed?
The core insight that keeps coming back is the intimate connection between the human in the microcosm and the entire cosmos, the macrocosm.
We contain the universe in a way.
Though our fashion from it. Every part of us, the text says, corresponds to some process, being, or principle in the great outer world, both physical and spiritual.
Like the example of our organs developing during those cosmic stages.
Precisely. Heart, lungs, brain aren't just biological accidents. They're seen as having their deep origins in the evolutionary processes of old sun, old moon, earth. Becoming aware of these correspondences is a key part of the developing spiritual sight.
Microcosm mirrors macrocosm.
Got it. The text also looks even further ahead, doesn't it? Future evolution.
Briefly, yes. It mentions future cosmic stages beyond Earth, Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan, and further changes for Earth itself, including an eventual reunion with the Moon.
A reunion with the moon. Why? It's linked to humanity developing sufficient inner strength and spiritual maturity to handle the forces involved, using them constructively for future evolution.
And it mentions a possible split in humanity.
It raises the possibility not as a fixed fate, but a potential outcome based on human freedom of humanity diverging into communities pursuing good and evil, with the good then having the task of helping to redeem or uplift the fallen. Evolution isn't predetermined. Choice matters immensely.
And the purpose of this occult science, this grail knowledge, as it's sometimes called, in our time.
The book presents itself as an attempt to make this knowledge of higher worlds, imagination, inspiration, intuition, accessible in our modern intellectual age, but importantly, infused with the significance of the Christ event. It's knowledge meant to permeate not just thinking, but feeling and will too.
Transforming the whole person. And there's a connection between wisdom and love.
A very deep one, described as a core alchemical process. Cosmic wisdom, originally built into our bodies, becomes conscious inner wisdom through the ego's work on Earth. This inner wisdom, when truly lived and deepened, naturally intensifies and transforms into the seed of love.
So wisdom is the foundation.
Wisdom is the prerequisite. Love is the fruit wisdom reborn and made active through the heart of the ego. In this view, true spiritual knowledge isn't just cold data. It inherently carries the potential to become love in action.
Wow. Okay. We've covered a huge amount of ground, from the intricate layers of the human being through sleep, death, rebirth, across vast cosmic ages, looking at historical forces and outlining a demanding path to direct spiritual perception.
It's definitely a complex, tightly interwoven worldview presented in these excerpts, based entirely on that claim of attainable supersensible knowledge.
It really does challenge our everyday assumptions about reality, consciousness, history. Everything, really.
Mhm.
So here's something to leave you thinking about. If reality is fundamentally spiritual, as this perspective suggests, and if knowledge isn't just information, but a potential force for transforming our very being and aligning us with cosmic evolution, what does that truly imply about human potential? What kind of future could unfold if knowledge itself becomes a path of inner transformation and, ultimately, love?
A very different picture than we usually hold. Lots to ponder there.
Indeed. And that's been our deep dive into these excerpts from Rudolf Steiner's Occult Science. An outline.